Hey sis, God sees you and He's sending a message to you. You are not behind. Your purpose still needs you and you don't need to rush your becoming. I know when you look at where you are versus where you know you should be, you begin to see that gap as evidence that you're doing something wrong. You see the posts and the highlight reels on your social media feed, and you begin to question within yourself, when will it be my turn? I just came to speak to you today to answer that question once and for all. Because when you have assignment on your life, it doesn't require comparison, it requires commitment. We're going to dive right into our bold declaration. And I want you to get somewhere quiet where you can truly receive this, whether you feel like just listening or even repeating after me. Let this minister to you where you are today. For far too long, I've held myself up to a standard that wasn't heaven sent nor self aligned, a standard that creates urgency in my becoming that isn't required. I know that with every bushel experience and background behavior that I've overcome, I've grown. I have developed into more of the woman God has created me to be. How dare I rush things? If I am to believe that God has authored a beautiful faith story for me, then I must also believe that my purpose, calling, and becoming are on schedule. So here I am, committed to my journey, running my own race with patience. Today, I boldly declare I am not behind. I am on God's perfect timeline for my life. I hope that you are holding this bold declaration in your heart and that you will continue to carry it with you throughout the rest of today's episode and beyond. Hey sis, welcome to the Bold Becomers podcast. I'm your host, Chara, and this is the space for extraordinary women of faith who love God deeply, but know that there's more alignment, more freedom, and more shine waiting for them. If you're tired of shrinking, self-silencing, or feeling like authenticity and faith are somehow at odds, you're in the right place. Here we unpack godly authenticity, bold becoming, and the shine method so you can realign your value, your voice, and your virtue and live your faith with clarity and courage. So, if you're ready to stop hiding, start aligning, and live like you were made to shine, you're in good company. Grab your journal, let's talk. You've been measuring yourself up against two things that have nothing to do with you. The first being someone else's line of progress, the things that they're doing, the ways that it seems like they are prospering and even fulfilling what it seems that God has called them to do. And then the other thing that you're holding yourself up against is this imagined timeline in your own mind that says that you should be further than this by now. And the problem is when you're measuring yourself from those two standards, neither one of them are aligned for you. Neither one of them are heaven sent, because the reality is that we can offer God our submission. We can offer God our obedience. We can even be committed to showing up in the ways that God is calling us to in the season. But what we don't get a say over is the time. We don't get a say over when due season is. Due season is in God's hands. And so when you're measuring yourself up against this imagined timeline in your head, you're telling yourself that I'm not doing things right. I haven't gotten it right. I'm still figuring things out. I'm still getting my life together. Whatever it is that narrative plays on in your head over again that says that you should be doing something else or you should be further than you are. You have to learn how to view it in its proper perspective, because you can do everything right and still not see a full manifestation or results on a timeline that you thought you would see it on. Does that mean that the work hasn't worked? Absolutely not. And so The other side of that, when it comes to you feeling behind, is that you're looking at someone else's journey. You're looking at someone else's commitments that they may be fulfilling, and they're seeing results or they're seeing a harvest on what they've been doing. And you're thinking to yourself that it just doesn't seem fair. Like, when will my time come, right? But I also want to address that too, because as long as you're looking at someone else's path and you're looking at someone else's race, there are some elements to that that really do not serve you. The first thing is that you have to understand that you are not on anyone else's path. You're on your own. Your path was designed specifically for you. It is God ordained. It is God predestined. And so if you are looking at someone else's path and wondering when your time will come, well, honey, your path is not their path. Your purpose is not their purpose. Your assignment is not their assignment. And you are not them. What they may need to develop and become who God created them to be is something that's totally different than what you may require to become all that God created you to be. And so when you start to realize that, you can take off the shoulds, you can put down the comparison, and understand that God is perfecting you in real time, and that instead of using your energy to make yourself feel as though you are not progressing, maybe it might be more fulfilling, more edifying for you to look at where you've been versus where you are now, and to start taking notice of the progress that God has allowed in your life and the ways that you have been able to move forward, and that you are still becoming as you continue to do so. And when you make a decision to put down the comparison, when you make a decision to stop beating yourself up for the timeline that you're on, that is when you will start to notice that God is doing his good work in you, and that as you're becoming, there is nothing wrong with the journey that you're on, with the path that you're on, because it's assigned specifically for you. Time for our Shine Method connection. For those of you who may be new to Bold Becomers podcast, this is the segment of our podcast where we get to dive into my proprietary framework, the Shine Method. The Shine Method is actually what I use in my coaching to help extraordinary women of faith just like yourself to move from the background of their lives into the forefront. Now, the entire purpose of the Shine Method is to walk you through principles that will help you to not only embrace who you are, but to embrace who you're becoming, and to express all of your light as you continue along that path. SHINE is an acronym. The S stands for Seek the Truth, the H for Honor Your Story, the I for Include the Lessons, the N for Navigate Your Growth, and the E for Embrace and Express. For today's episode, we're going to be diving into E, Embrace and Express. For this principle of the SHINE method, what you need to understand is that embracing and expressing has nothing to do with arriving. It's really more so about you understanding that you can show up in your fullness where you are, and also embrace who you're becoming and still showing up as you're becoming. So you're becoming and you're expressing and you're embracing, and all of those things work together to create your unique light in the earth, and it becomes a blessing to others. Embrace and express is really about giving yourself permission to show up where you are with what you have in your fullness. No shame attached, no shoulds attached. You are just shining your light as God commanded in Matthew 5:16, and allowing others to see your good works and to glorify your Father which is in heaven. I think this principle being applied to this episode really gives us permission to assess where in our lives we have kind of held ourselves back or postponed our expression because we felt like we should have been further along, or we felt like conditions in our lives should have aligned differently for us to show up. And so I'm really excited that we get to talk about this today, because I think that if you can learn how to embrace and express in real time, you will start to see that you don't need to resent your progress. You don't need to feel bad about where you are. You can literally stand in the power and the authority that God has given you in this season and do what He's called you to do without reserve and without feeling like you have to be further along or you have to be a different version of yourself in order to do what God is calling you to do. When we start activating ourselves with embrace and express, and understanding that we are commissioned to shine, we have been commanded to shine, this gives us what we need to just show up imperfectly, to show up with our best and allow God to add His grace, to show up in a way that maybe it does look a little messy in the beginning, or maybe it does look like it needs improvement, but allowing yourself the grace and the space to just show up anyway and allow God to develop you in real time. Many of us believe that God will get the glory out of our lives once we are in a perfected state. But I would beg to differ that God actually is glorified when we are choosing to allow Him to use us where we are as a yielded vessel, regardless of things being perfect or ideal or whatever the case may be, and allowing Him to just show up in our lives and to use us with what we have, and allowing Him to develop us as we are giving Him our yes. There is something about obedience and action and faith that all work together to not only fulfill the assignment, but it furthers the kingdom and it encourages someone else to know that they can stand in what God has called them to. And we just have to get out of our own way and stop showing up with this preconceived notion that our work, our assignment, our calling is not meaningful if it doesn't look a certain way or if it doesn't present a certain way. God designed you to be you. He called you to be who you are, because there are some things that can only be done through you. And the sooner you recognize that and begin to embrace and express, that is when you will start to see how much of an impact God really wants to make in your life and how He wants to use you as His chosen vessel in this season. I'm not sure how you've been consuming Bold Becomers podcast. Maybe you've just been listening, or maybe you found us on YouTube. But for those of you who only listen to the podcast, I do have to put another shameless plug for you to go over to YouTube at Chara Shine and to actually start watching the content that's there, because we have been integrating more of the topics that we've been talking about on the episodes. And one of those things has been from our last episode, which was sign your own permission slip. When we got into the thick of that episode, it became immediately clear to me that there was a gap in understanding what it really means to give yourself permission and what that does for you in your becoming journey and how that helps you to shine. So, in between this episode and the last episode, we actually did a piece of content that helps you to see what permission really looks like in real time. And I feel like I want to bring it up here so that you can integrate it in a way that helps you to embrace your journey as your own and also to not rush the process of your own journey. Okay? So, that concept that we talked about in my last video on YouTube is actually called permission posts. Permission posts are what I would describe as little signs along your path or your journey of becoming. And the signs are not actually like, hey, go this way or, turn right. But it's actually a sign that is more like a gateway, and it has like for the sake of imagination, it has like a gate arm on it, right? And that permission post will not allow you to pass until you have made the decision that you need to make at that post. I could give an example in the Bible that would help to illustrate that. I believe that God wanted the children of Israel to really believe that the promised land was theirs and that God would help them to conquer whatever they needed to conquer to receive the promised land. When you see the 12 spies being sent into the land and you recognize that only two of those 12 spies came back with a good report, and the 10 spread the belief that they would not be able to conquer the land because there were giants in the land and because they would be consumed by those people, right, that were there. It created a disbelief among the people of God. Well, what I believe, if we're talking about permission posts, is that God was giving them a permission post to believe that He would perform His word in their lives. And instead of them deciding to believe that God's word is true and that God would help them, they decided to lean to the opposite and to believe that they wouldn't have help. And so, what did that do? That caused them to wander. They caused them to go into the wilderness for 40 years, and they had to wander for 40 years until that entire generation of people who would not believe and who would not actually make the decision that they needed to make would die off in the wilderness because they did not believe and to actually do what they needed to do to pass that permission post. And so, bringing it back to what we're talking about here, I believe that every part of your path is going to be designed specifically for you. When we looked at that example in the Bible with the children of Israel, we saw what their permission post was for them. But maybe for yours, it's you learning how to lean into delegating and to receiving help from others. Maybe that's a permission post that God has you at in this season. Maybe someone else, their permission post is learning how to trust that God is going to fulfill what He's spoken to them. Or maybe for someone else, their permission post is learning to set boundaries that help to serve the purpose that God has assigned them. None of us get to choose what our permission posts are, but what I can say is that each permission post is essential to our becoming. And God allows us to come to those permission posts because He knows exactly what we need in order to become who we are supposed to be in order to do what He's called us to. But the flip side to our permission post and using that in comparison to someone else's permission post is understanding that we will never be on the same path as someone else. Like our journey, our race is ours. The Bible says that we are to run this race with patience. That's talking about endurance. Well, the race that I'm running may not be the race that you're running, but that's also because God did not give us the same assignment. And even if He did give us the same assignment, He would not expect it to be expressed or fulfilled the same way because we are individuals and He created us uniquely and divinely. And we have to understand how to embrace that and to not allow ourselves to compare our permission post that we're in this season with someone else's permission post that they've already passed and they've gotten further along on their own path or journey. So I hope that as you've learned this concept, you're able to see that you're not behind because your journey is your own, and whatever permission post that is coming up for you next or that you're learning how to address in this season, you are giving yourself grace, but you're also encouraging yourself to know that this permission post was given by God as a gateway to get me further along to my purpose. And I hope that you're able to take that authority and to take the agency that we talked about last week, right? And to make the decision that needs to be made so that you can continue to move forward. Here are some practical strategies for you to embrace your own timeline. I just want to say that the importance of this episode is not to get you to a place where you feel shame for comparing. I just want to say that I think it is human to look to others for example and to try to use other people's journeys as a measuring system. But when we understand that our journey is our own and our path is our own, then we have to be a little bit more deliberate about understanding the journey that we're on. If I know that my becoming will never look like someone else's becoming, then how do I start to align myself so that I can identify my permission posts and start to give the decisions that need to be given for me to move past those permission posts? So I want to talk to that today as I'm giving these practical strategies. What you need to do is you actually should be journaling. I know that some people don't believe in it, or maybe you only do it when you really need to. But in my own becoming journey, I've found that when you journal, you have a way to look back on where you were, to also sit with where you are. And as you journal, you will naturally start to speak to where God is taking you. And so if you're journaling, this gives you a record that you can actually go back to and look at the places where you may be rerouting and just coming back to the same permission post over and over again. God is not going to shut you down and sit you down and tell you that you are no longer required because you didn't pass the permission post. No. What is He going to do? He's going to allow you to go through some other things. He's going to allow life to send you some more invitations, some more messages that are going to get you to come right back around to that same permission post and finally make the decision that needs to be made so that you can continue to move forward. So what I'll say is I want you to start thinking back. Start looking back. Let's start with the short timeline first. Let's look over the last 3 months since we are now past the middle of this year. Let's look over the last 3 months. Where were you at in the last 3 months versus where you believed God was taking you to in this year? And when you look at where you are presently, right, from the 3 months, I want you to start assessing and saying, are there any patterns of experiences that I'm seeing right now? And when you start to look at it from that lens, I want you to just notice the patterns. You can maybe even just write them out in a separate journal entry. This is what I've noticed. This is what I did. For those of you who don't see a pattern right now that is presently going on, but maybe you recognize in the last 3 months that God has allowed you to break a pattern, right? Maybe there was something that transpired that caused you to make a different decision than you have made ever before. I want you to go ahead and write that out in the journal entry. I want you to write out in the last 3 months, this is the permission post that I passed, or this is the decision that I made. And you will know a permission post because usually once you make it, it can sometimes feel like breakthrough. It can feel like relief. It can also feel like empowerment, like you're finally standing in your power. When you get to a permission post that you actually decide at, those are some of the feelings that might come up for you. It can also feel like you're rebuilding too. Sometimes permission posts will come when it seems like certain things in your life are being deconstructed or falling apart per se. And then God uses that opportunity as a permission post for you to decide how you're then going to carry forward. Does that make sense? So I want you to just take a moment. And I really feel like this practical strategy right here is how you really stay committed to your becoming journey, how you stay present in your becoming journey, and how you allow yourself to not feel shame for where you're at because you're actually doing the work. Part of doing the work is not just the progress that's made, but doing the work is being aware and being cognizant and proactive in what is happening, right? In realizing that, hey, in real time, God is showing me the areas of my life where I need to make decisions that are going to put me in alignment with what He's calling me to. And I'm actually making those decisions. Or, hey, this is an area where I haven't made that decision yet, and I need to start paying attention and coming to a place where it's time to make that decision. Doing the work looks like that. And I think that if we give ourselves permission to just take notice, take assessment of our lives, this will give us the space for God to communicate with us, to give us more insight about what's going on in our lives, and it will give us permission to really start embracing where we are and where we've been and what God is doing in us as we continue to move forward. It's time for our challenge of the week. For your challenge of the week, I want you to identify your most recent permission post. Yeah, that's right. I want you to identify your most recent permission post. So you either have a permission post that you recently passed and recently decided on and moved forward from there, or you have a permission post that you are approaching or that you're currently at, and you know that God is inviting you and positioning you for you to make a decision and to move forward at that permission post. So that's your homework for this week. I want you to identify your permission post, okay? And if you're really feeling froggy, I would love for you to share what you identified and what your permission post was, and share it with me on social media. You can find me over on Instagram, on YouTube, or Facebook at Chara Janae Shine. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to celebrate with you the permission post that you've identified or the permission post that you recently passed through. That would be so amazing and so life-giving for me. So I would love to hear about it, and I cannot wait to hear what God reveals to you about what you have recently passed through or what He's getting you to pass through in this season. All right. As we close out today's episode, I just want to remind you that you are not behind. And now that you know that, what freedom does that bring to you? Because as long as you are holding yourself to a standard that isn't yours, you're going to feel heaviness. You're going to feel bound. But the moment that you realize that you don't have to hold yourself to that standard, that's where freedom comes in. That's where the light comes in, that you're able to realize, like, I have permission to shine. I have permission to show up in my fullness. And I am looking forward to hearing the testimonies, hearing the response of what realizing your own timeline is sacred brings to you. I would love for you to share that with me. And even furthermore, I cannot wait to see the impact that comes from it. So as you're leaving from today's episode, remind yourself, I am not behind, I am becoming. In the meantime, continue to remember to keep becoming, embrace godly authenticity, and live with shine. I'll see you in our next episode.